Well, the response to the video that I did inviting you to ask questions has been pretty impressive, and the questions keep pouring in, and so the answers will keep pouring out. I guess I've got another, 16, 18 questions here that I'm going to answer in this video to the best of my ability. And as I always say, keep in mind that these are my opinions based on my experience, and you might have a little bit of differing opinion, but that's okay. Another thing I should mention that I've noticed over the years is I've been around quite a few people that are very successful bear hunters, and that's everything from guides to private people that are really good at it, that some of them you've never heard of and some of them you have. One of the things that always impresses me is that the more you do this, the more you get good at it, and when you sit around the campfire with somebody who's very successful, you're always surprised that they've arrived at a lot of the same conclusions that you have. So keep that in mind as we go along. So let's jump right into the questions here. First question, my first year as a bear hunter with a northern Wisconsin tag. It is going to be common bumping bears off the bait after dark when leaving the stand in the evenings. It's often talked about how important it is not to spook bears off the bait, but that seems inevitable. Any tips on how not to blow a spot early come the first few sits of the season? Okay, this is a really tough issue that we run into all the time, and this is something outfitters particularly run into because they are running multiple people on the baits. And the basic answer to this is that the first time you hunt the bait is your best chance to kill a big bear. And if you're going to hold out for a bigger bear, each time that you leave the stand in the dark, if there's bears around you, you're educating those bears. And there's always a fairly good chance that if you've got a big mature bear that's coming in right before sunset or right after dark, he's very close. The best way to deal with this is to have someone come in and pick you up at the stand, and so they're not focused on activity of someone climbing down from a tree stand. It's also a good idea to make sure that you're parked, your four-wheeler, your truck, or whatever is 75 to 100 yards at least away from the bait. I would say even more than that if you feel like you're going to be going in and out of there a lot. But there's really no easy answer to this. The main thing is that every time you hunt and every time you have to get out of the stand, if there's bears around you, you reduce your chance of killing a bear on that stand, and that's just the simple reality of it. So this is a topic that should be discussed more. If you've got an opinion on this, definitely leave a comment in the comment section below, because there's a lot more that could be talked about this, but that's the gist of it right there. How common will it be to see wolves on bait sites, and how to approach those situations? Is that site still bear huntable, or will the wolves take dominance over these sets? Okay, great question, because here's the thing with wolves. Wolves are one of the few predators that bears just simply don't like, and I've seen situations where wolves just take over a bait. Wolves can really harass bears. They'll jump in and bite them in the butt while their head's in a barrel. They'll harass them in different ways. Wolves have been known to pull bears out of the den and eat them, especially cubs, and wolves and bears just don't get along. And so once a wolf is on a bait, it definitely reduces the effectiveness of that bait. The main thing you can do is not use things that are attractive to wolves, like beef scraps, meat, any kind of meat. Fryer oil can be, if it has the right smell to it. Bacon, I use bacon and bacon grease and things like that on a lot of my baits, but if I'm in an area where there's a lot of wolves, I have to just not use that. Although I've seen situations where wolves have been on baits and they have just simply eaten the pastries and so forth, and then they keep checking back, and so you just want to avoid getting wolves on your bait. I have seen times when wolves just shut the bait down. That's not common, but the bears will be more cautious around the bait, and it reduces your chance of seeing multiple bears and so forth on that bait if wolves are on it. So The key is to try to keep the wolves off of it in the first place, because once they're there, there's not a lot you can do. With a 5-hour drive to my hunting destination, how long prior to the season should I start to try to establish a bait site? And as a new hunter, is there any way to make a site last more than a few days between trips? Would it be a waste of time to run a bait site with a large gap in between, baiting a few weeks to a month between, or would it be more cost effective to start a bait site a week or two before the season and bait consistently closer to and during the open season? Okay, so this is a question that's asked by a person in Wisconsin. So the answer in Wisconsin is different than it would be in most other states, because in Wisconsin you're limited to 10 gallons of bait per trip. And that makes a big difference, because you can't just load a bait up with 300 pounds and then bait it on every other weekend or something like that. So generally it's, I think, in late April when Wisconsin allows the baiters to start. And my opinion would be to go ahead and put some bait on your bait site periodically during the spring and summer, and just so the bears come and they're rewarded. They put that spot on their route. I don't think you have to have bait there all the time in April, May, June, July, but you just want the bears to know it's there and that there's often food there. So, if you go up once every 3 weeks or a month, and any chance you get, and put your 10 gallons of bait out, it's a good idea to do that just as often as you can. And then when it gets to the point where it's about 2 to 3 weeks before the season, then it's time to just make sure there's bait there all the time and hold the bears right in that area. You're going to be competing with natural foods pretty quick, and you need the bears to just fall in love with that spot and stay close by. So that'd be my suggestion for a strategy for people in Wisconsin, and I know that's been successful for others. I just think it's the best strategy, unless you are close enough that you can bait more often. If you're 5 hours away, you're probably just going to be able to bait every other weekend or something like that. So just do what you can, and then when it gets to be about 2 weeks before the season, then really pour the coals to it. Okay, Thomas, what color do black bears see? Can they see green and red? That's a really good question, and we have some scientific knowledge of what different kinds of animals see, and we have a pretty good idea what bears see, although we actually have more knowledge about white-tailed deer than we do about bears, because there's been a couple of universities that have dissected the deer's eye, and they believe that a bear's eye is pretty similar to what deer see, and they see the blue ultraviolet end of the spectrum much better than humans do. And we suspect that bears are pretty much similar to that. Of course, you have to realize that bears' vision is optimized for survival. The color is not as important to them, but they do see green, blue, and purples, ultraviolet, and they do not have a UV filter on their eyes like humans do. So white-tailed deer, we know that, and most ungulates do not have a UV filter, so they see blues much, much brighter than we do, but since they see that other end of the spectrum, they can't see reds well at all. It looks very subdued to them, probably almost gray, and also then that's why fluorescent orange is somewhat less visible to them than it is to the human eye. But we don't know exactly. We just have some inferences that can be made by what we know about other animals that have actually had their eyes dissected and counted the rods and cones, and so we have a pretty good idea that bears have surprisingly good vision. A lot of people think that bears have poor vision. That's an old wives' tale. They have very good vision, and they don't see the same colors that we do, but they likely see. I wouldn't go to the tree stand in blue jeans, put it that way, because they can see that very, very bright. Okay, Thomas, great channel. I have 2 questions. What are your thoughts on the use of a sow and heat urine during the spring bear hunts? Okay, that's a good question. I have used sow and heat sprays during spring, but I just don't really know that it's as effective as some of the other sprays that I've used. I would say my favorite spring bear lure is beaver castor, and I use a Northwoods bear spray with a beaver castor, and it's just killer. And of course I use Gold Rush, and I tend to in the fall use more of the fruit scents like raspberry, strawberry, blueberry, and so forth, and in the spring it's pretty much beaver castor that I almost use exclusively because it's been so successful for me. The breeding season, of course, is about the 1st of June through 1st of July-ish. If you have a sow and heat urine that you trust, then I would go ahead and use it. I would also encourage you to think about the fact that there are tens of thousands of deer in captivity that they collect urine from, and I don't know of any bears that they're collecting urine from. So whatever sow and heat lure is out there is probably going to have to be some kind of synthetic that's an attempt to mimic sow and heat. So question number 2 from Travis: given bears have such a great sense of smell, do you think ozone generators can make a difference even when playing the wind? The science behind ozone is very good. There's absolutely no doubt that ozone kills human odor. You can put your clothes in a enclosed area with an ozone generator and you'll kill the human odor on those clothes. But once you put those clothes back on and go out into the woods, you're still starting to shed skin cells and all of the things that cause human scent to be put into the environment. I mean, you're aspirating into your lungs and breathing out and so forth. So ozone can kill human odor in an enclosed place, but I think sitting in a tree stand and putting an ozone generator above your head and expecting that to kill your scent is pretty optimistic, to say the least. I would say there's certainly a role for it in a ground blind where you're in an enclosed area, but of course you don't want to breathe it for hours and hours and hours. Your scent is part of the package, and that's one of the advantages that we have. Bears are different than deer. You can't just go to your deer stand over and over and get the deer used to your smell like you can with baiting bears, because the bears know that this is what I smell when I come to this bait. I smell this guy, I smell this, I smell that, I smell that. And you can't try to cover up your scent, but you want to minimize it as a small part of the package. And one of the best ways to do that is with the scent killing sprays. While you're in the stand, it can help minimize your scent. And you know, I like to look at it like it's like a pie chart, where you know, this slice is this, and this slice is the bait, and this slice is your Gold Rush, and this slice is your human scent. The smaller of a slice you can make your human scent, the better. You know, if you've got an ozone generator, go ahead and use it. I'll stick with the sprays personally, because I know the science is there for actually killing scent on my body. Winston, I have a question for you. How do you get big bears to hit a bait during the day? And is there any tricks and tips on how to do it? Would you add more bait to draw them in? You know, I've answered this question quite a bit, and the gist of the answer is that every time they hit the bait, they're getting something as a reward. You want them to get something good to eat. I wouldn't say that cutting back on bait is a good idea. I know that there's people who say we cut back right before the season to try to create competition. I think that's been counterproductive every single time that I've tried it. It just doesn't seem to work. Put as much bait out as you need to. Okay, my first year of bear hunting. I'm a Wyoming resident, and the section I'm planning on getting has a small creek on one side of the section and beaver ponds on the opposite side. Is it better to set closer to the creek or to the beaver ponds? Okay, so in Wyoming, you have to register a square mile section. I'm just going to give you a little background, because this is a question that is unique to the way they do it in Wyoming. You can put a certain number of baits out, and then you have to register a square mile section, and you're the only one that can bait in that section. Now, the first part of the answer to this question is that you have to stay a certain, I think it's 200 yards, could be 200 feet, but you can't put your bait, I think it's 200 feet within the distance to water. So that's the first question. If you got a creek on one side and a beaver pond on the other, You know, bear, you want your bait be as close to water as you can get, but you also have to realize that the bears want to be comfortable, and they like beavers. They like beaver ponds because they can go lay in a swamp. That creek is probably snow melt. If it's anything like the places I've hunted in Wyoming, that creek is probably 36 degrees, and a bear's not going to just lay in there all day like he might in a beaver pond. So that would probably give the edge to the beaver pond, but the overall trump card is where can you get the best scent distribution for your bait site. So without knowing any more information than the fact that there's a creek on one side and a pond on the other, and I would put the bait pretty high so those evening thermals will drift your scent of your bait down. If you can get between the two and still be close enough that the bears will be close during the day, you know, it's pretty hard to say without looking at it, but my sense is that I would, if there's a kind of a high spot near the beaver pond, without having any more information, that's what I'd be looking for. Are there commercial retailers for large quantities of available baits and scents and lures specific to bears? And yes, there's a lot of stores like L&M Fleets and Shields and sporting goods stores, Cabela's, that carry Northwoods bear products. So you can get their sprays and so forth. A lot of bait and tackle shops in the areas where bear hunting is kind of a big thing. They'll have the sprays and everything like that. And there are multiple large bait suppliers where you can buy tons and tons of bait, whether that's candies and trail mix or popcorn and all those different types of things. There are lots of them across the Midwest. There's two big ones here in Minnesota and a couple of smaller ones. There are, I think there's 5 or 6 in Wisconsin. There's some in Michigan. And so, you know, I would just Google it. The two that are close to me here in Minnesota that I buy a lot of my bait from are Wildwood Bear Bait and then Lucky 7 Bear Baits. Probably, he's in Cambridge, Minnesota, north of the Twin Cities, probably the biggest one in the nation. He could be, if not, he's one of the largest. How long should you wait on a new site before considering the site a failed set and moving on? I have had baits that sat for 4 or 5 days, and then when a bear found them, within a week there's 3 or 4 bears on them. That's a hard question to answer. If you're using good scents and lures and your bait's in a good location, if it hasn't been hit within 3 or 4 days, something's probably wrong. You're either in an area with really low bear population or your location's probably wrong. And so I guess that'd be my rule of thumb, is it'd be unusual for me to continue to work a bait if it hasn't been hit for 4 or 5 days. Unless I have past history with it or something like that. Okay, where do bears spend their midday activities? Sleeping, roaming, climbing in trees, or hanging out near water, grazing on natural foods, etc.? What kind and type of terrain do the daily activities take place? High ground, low ground, wet? Keep in mind that bear hunting takes place in the spring and early fall when the weather is warm and the bears have a thick layer of fat, they have a thick layer of fur, and they want to keep cool. So water is always going to be a part of their daily activity. They are trying to consume 20 to 25,000 calories a day. So the water not only helps keep them cool, but they drink a lot of water to help digest all those calories that they're taking in. So their daily activity definitely revolves around water, but they also continue to feed day and night. During the hyperphagia phase, from midsummer on, they are trying to take in as much calories as possible, so they're feeding day and night. And so oak ridges, wherever the natural food is, there's berries. They know where the blueberry patches are. They know where the raspberries and blackberries are, the beech nuts. They know where all this stuff is, so that's where their daily activity is going to revolve around. But always keep in mind there's going to be water as a part of that. Massachusetts Trapper. I found a spot on a ridgeline this past fall where a bear had been sitting on the ground and eating the nuts. Or at least that's my thought. I walked farther north and found a second one. They were both pear-shaped, scraped out shapes on the ground. Walked all around about a mile in all directions and couldn't find anything else. First time I've seen this on my mountain top. We had a great year for the mass crop, plus plenty of corn, and they're not far from this location. Most of the cornfields had less sign than normal. Do they prefer nuts over corn, or is it a matter of just feeling safe? No baits or scents or dogs are allowed. Bears do like corn, especially when it's in that milk stage. There's about a week or two right there where the bears can really hit the corn. But always keep in mind that bears are designed to be an integral part of their environment. So natural foods that they're designed to eat are always going to take preference over everything else. And I don't care how good your bait is, if there's a lot of acorns and beech nuts and berries and the things that bears naturally eat, you're going to struggle to pull them off those natural foods. So while bears really like corn, they love oats. If there's a lot of natural foods around, they're going to be using the natural foods. And yes, sometimes if they feel safe, they'll just bed right there in the food source. So that's probably the bear beds that you saw. It's probably what you saw is taking place right there. Okay, Desi says, what's your opinion on running multiple baits and how far apart are you putting them? Because bears can travel a long ways to a food source, is there a certain distance I should have my other baits? Where currently I'm on 1,500 acres of private land and only running one bait for years, I've always been successful, but now the wife has since joined me and would like to have more options. Would 2 or 3 sites just mess with the bears, or will it bring more bears in? So depending on how the 1,500 acres are laid out, you're looking at over 2 square miles. My general rule is to put baits at least 2 miles apart. So if you would have habitat on the edges, I suppose, of this 1,500 acres where you could be close to 2 miles apart, certainly you could put 2 baits out there. You're going to have some crossover where bears are going to visit both baits. 2 miles is just not enough to isolate a bear onto that bait. They move around a lot. So that's just my general rule, and I find that bigger males tend to visit more baits than females, and younger males travel a lot. Those 3, 4, 5-year-old males, they are on the move all the time. They're constantly fighting and trying to get in a pecking order and so forth, and they're surly and they just are moving around a lot. So some of those bears you'll find that visit both baits. But I think what you'll find if you have 2 baits on 1,500 acres of property, one of the baits is going to be in a better location with the more things that the bears need with the bedding cover and so forth, and it's just going to be right, and most of the bears are going to be at that spot. But the other side of that is the potential that some of the bears might get pushed off by more dominant bears, and then you've given them a second option. So that's what I would say. If you can get 2 on there and they're far, if they're close to 2 miles apart, 1.5 miles a minimum, then try to make it work. Otherwise, I would look elsewhere. Okay, John. First question, you've obviously taken quite a few bears with your bow. Have you always used the same broadheads, and have you experimented with any of the single bevel broadheads? Now, no, I have not always used the same broadheads. I shot a lot of bears with a bow, probably a dozen with the Ulmer Edge, which is a small expandable broadhead that I don't think you can get it anymore. I used that because they were one of my sponsors. Trophy Taker was one of my sponsors. They were providing me with a lot of equipment, and I did like that. Right now I'm just shooting a Slick Trick 125 grain broadhead, and I have not tried any of the single bevel broadheads. The science and the research that's been done on these single bevel broadheads is pretty convincing with regard to penetration and killing deer. I don't know of anybody that's really using them a lot on bears. With deer, you can really make a case that it's good to have a big hole in a deer when you hit it with a broadhead, but with bears, you want 2 holes rather than 1 big one. I'll take 2 small ones any day. You want a low exit wound so you get a good blood trail. You want that arrow to pass through the bear, so you want a minimal resistance with as much cutting edge. And so I would say a general sense would be to use a fixed blade, although today's bows, and especially crossbows, those things have the kinetic energy and the momentum to push just about anything all the way through, even a good sized bear. But I'm going to stick with what I've got for right now. Maybe somebody will do some research on bear hunting with single bevel broadheads. But so yeah, I've killed 37 bears with a bow, and I've settled pretty solidly on a good fixed blade, sharp broadhead for my needs to get that second hole. And there is a video on this channel. If you just search in the search bar on this channel for I think it's bows and broadheads for bears or something like that it's called, and I go into this in quite a bit of detail, a little more on the kinetic energy and momentum and why it's so important to have an exit wound when you shoot a bear. It really increases your odds of recovering that bear. Okay, so that's another bunch of questions, and keep them coming. I mean, I guess I'll keep doing this as long as you keep asking questions. And like I said from the beginning, and I'm giving you my opinions, and you're certainly welcome to disagree with me. And if you want to put a comment in the comment section below to add something or disagree, then by all means you're more than welcome to. So thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next video.